Welcome to the Cosmic Dispatch, a show about bodies, celestial and earthbound, time, experience, and the relationship between all of them. I'm your host, Cory Nakasue, and good afternoon. Hope you're all doing well on this Memorial Day weekend. Today, Mandee Sheeler and I are going to dig into the power of the question, not only in astrology, but also in life. And I believe the question is Gemini's favorite tool. Um, and I also think it's Gemini's power tool. A carefully considered question can open doors and pathways you've never dreamed possible. And a lazy question or a non question, when you dismantle it, can reveal that it might not even actually be a question when you really take it apart. Um, and in that situation, that can just keep you really stuck, or worse, running around in circles, thinking that you're doing something right with your mind. You're looking for an answer, but it doesn't really get you anywhere or get you anything. And I think on some level, we all know the power and possible danger of questions, which is why I think we sometimes ask those lazy questions or non questions, because a good question can change your life. A good question might not even need an answer. Like, if you've ever asked or have been asked one of those really good questions, you know what I'm talking about. A good question has the answer right inside of it. And a good question can render an answer totally useless. And by examining the questions we ask ourselves, others, and the universe, we can find all sorts of constructs and biases that we project onto others or situations that limit possibility, that limit the possibility of actually learning something new. And I've been really busy with consultations this month, so this is very front of mind for me. um, for example, I get a lot of questions like this. So here's an example. How come the people I get into relationships with always end up being selfish? Okay, so in this question, I can tell a lot about the person's expectations and their experience, but I don't really um, get a sense of the person. And so that question would be an example of a lazy question or a non-question. And I don't even think that's the actual question being asked. I think there's a question underneath that question. And if we find out what that is, we don't even need an answer. The thing about finding the real question, if the person is seriously asking, is that even asking the real question will change them in some way. And this is how we know a question is powerful. And so I think the question underneath, how come the people I get into relationships with always end up being selfish? Just even in that, it sounds very passive, right? Um, so I think a better question, or the real question, might be something like, what benefit do I receive by choosing people who focus more on themselves than me? Or are there behaviors that I demonstrate that encourage other people to withhold attention? What are those? I mean, you can already see like that opens about 10 doors right there. Or we could go really broad with what constitutes a healthy amount of selfishness in a relationship? And am I in compliance with my own opinion about that? Boom. Again, like 10 doors open that you can, or 10 pathways open up that you can walk down. Um, so, yeah, these are questions that reveal something. They widen the doors of perception, and really important that you can take action on and try some things out. These questions take you into possibility and put some control in your hands. And of course, once we realize that change can be under our control, uh-oh, that makes us responsible. Um, there are questions that once asked, whether they're answered or not, you can't ever go back to pretending that you don't know something, which is why I think we do sometimes opt for the lazy question or the non question or the question with an easy answer. Um, Answers, when you think about it, are actually thought stoppers. Once you have an answer, the thought process ceases. Why do you need to think anymore? There's your answer. And a good question will perpetuate more questions, I find. So that we're always in the throes of mental movement, which is one of the big things that Gemini is all about. So that's a little merry-go-round of questions for you. And with me today to talk about questions and relay some questions from you, our audience, and also talk about this week's astro weather is none other than the keeper of the questions herself, Mandee Sheeler. How are you, Mandee?
Hi, Cory. I'm doing well. I'm excited for this question episode. I've been looking forward to it.
And also, I have a question.
Yeah.
You look different. Are you blonde?
No,
Okay,
it's just style. It's all still dark.
okay,
It's just up in front.
okay. I'm not
I
wearing
have been
makeup.
outside a lot lately, so it might be lightening up a little bit.
Okay, well, whatever this thing is going on, I like it.
Thank you.
Um, so for those who are new to the show, Mandee, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're into these days?
Sure, yeah. So I'm into the cosmic dispatch. I'm into this, Cory. I'm into astrology. I'm into writing. I'm a parent and I homeschool my kid, so that takes up a lot of my time. But I also consult one-on-one with others. I have a consulting practice. I am Gemini, so I do a lot of things.
Okay, and one of the things you do, we came
Yeah.
up with this little title for you, the keeper of the questions, but that's what you do. And you're also the proud owner of Venus and Mercury in Gemini. And so, since we're on the topic of questions, what what role do questions play in your life? How do you use them, or what excites you about them?
Well, I feel like I'm constantly on a quest for questions and answering questions and asking questions. Um, I I enjoy learning new bits of information, and I feel like that's what truly kind of invigorates part of my psyche. It's what really it's what gets me going. I like to be in this space of like doing mental acrobats, right? And like always thinking and always kind of fluttering through this file cabinet that I have in my brain. Um, that said, that can become really overwhelming and overstimulating. So I reach to my Taurus parts a lot to kind of, okay, we have all of this information. What are we going to do with it? And what are we going to embody with it? And what purpose is it truly serving us to have all of this information just kind of available? Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate. I have Saturn and Gemini, and I'm really happy about that because I also have Mars in Gemini. If I had Mars in Gemini all by itself, oh my goodness. Like I could just be, spinning out with wondering about this, wondering about that, and never really being able to build anything with those questions or
Yeah.
land those questions so that
Yeah.
they can take some kind of meaningful shape in my life. So I'm happy to have, as anyone who has a lot of Gemini, it's really helpful to have some grounding energy to work with when the mind is that active.
Yeah.
um and also, like Mandy and I do a lot of Gemini stuff. Like
Yeah.
m- I I think I we are in some kind of conversation at the very least every other day. Like I have old friends, I have people in my life, my mom, family. I
Yeah.
don't talk to them that much,
Right.
but like we are always in some kind of,
Yeah.
like, whether it's Instagram or Zoom or emails, always in touch just about every day. And we've
Yeah.
been talking about Chat GPT. Like everyone's been talking about Chat GPT, which is a
Yeah.
very Gemini thing, very Gemini symbol. And unlike me, you've been having fun with it and
Yeah.
asking it questions. And so how's your experience been with that?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. I should preface this conversation by saying I've dabbled, but I'm no expert. And what I've done has been really pretty minimal. I've used it for like meal planning. I like food. I like good food, and I'm conscious of the food I put in my body. And so, one of the things that I find really fascinating is I can type into Chat GPT, create a 7 day, 3 meal a day meal plan with X amount of protein per day, and it can just whip up, I mean, in seconds, a week's meal plan, and then give me a grocery list too, right? So I find that interesting. I guess to sum up how I've been using it, it would be to say like in maybe like an advanced search engine. Like I'm going to Google or to like look something up, and that's where just to see what it comes up with because it is new and it is kind of a novelty thing maybe right now. I don't think it will be forever, but it's interesting.
So you are getting something out of it. You're enjoying playing with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, um there are things I wouldn't recommend or that I'm not going to personally do with it. And I think we need to be mindful of how we use these tools in the future. But yeah, so far it's been fun for me.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm so tech averse. There's a meme that's been going around that I really like, and I'm having trouble recalling it, but it's something to the effect of, I don't want to live in a world where I'm still doing all the heavy labor and all the work, and AI or Chat GPT is making art and
Mm,
doing
wow.
all the creative stuff. And that's what I'm like, yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's okay in its place, like
Yeah.
to do that task oriented stuff.
Yeah.
But like, that's one of the issues with the Hollywood writers strike is they why do we need writers, right?
Right.
We can just whip that stuff up. And that
Yeah.
that makes me sad, because I really value human creativity and human output. And I don't know, I have so many like issues with um this like AI generated stuff and technology that make me really trepidatious. But also I think, it's the future,
Yeah.
and inherently it's not wonderful or bad. It's what we do with it. And
Yeah.
that's why I get wary. It's like, wow, look what we did with the internet. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's, I think at the end of the day, with any of this, like, there's a difference, I think, maybe between, like, I think Chat GPT is a type of AI, but I think AI is maybe a more umbrella, like all-encompassing. And
Mhm.
that's where I'm like, I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
not really qualified to talk about these things, but I can talk about my experience with it and kind of how I think about it. Um, yeah, there are definitely things to be mindful of. And one of the things that I haven't done is I haven't asked ChatGPT anything about astrology. I haven't asked it to write anything for me because I'm with you, Corey. Like, that's the stuff I don't want to be creating a grocery list every week and figuring out the grams of protein per item of food I'm putting, right? Like, I want to free up that time and that space so that I can write and I can feel and I can create and do. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And I think as we've done with the internet and still continue to do, we're just going to have to learn to kind of live alongside it and be mindful.
totally. Either that or I'm going off the grid, Mandy.
I'm open to that too.
Um, so so yeah, Mandy is going to be with us for the rest of the show, and she'll also be back next week with more audience questions. So if you're listening to this show, um, just take some of it on board, and during the week, you have time to craft some good questions for next week's full moon show. And we'll be getting a full moon in Sagittarius, and full moons are a great time for getting feedback. So definitely shoot us an email. We are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at this week's astro weather. You're listening to the Cosmic Dispatch. I'm your host, Cory Nakasue, and with me today is astrologer Mandee Sheeler. And in honor of Gemini season, we've been talking about questions and finding information. And much like Gemini itself, questions can be more complex, powerful, and dangerous, and even more telling than they seem. If you do the deep listening and unpacking of the questions that people ask you, um, you can get a lot of information. The questions that people ask speak volumes about where they're coming from. And yeah, people get all excited about answers, but I really think the question is where it's at. Um, and before we move on to the astro weather of the week, I just want to say thanks to everyone who supports this show and gives us such great feedback. It really helps us guide the work that we do. So please continue to share your experiences, musings, and your questions, and give us your recommendations. You can email us at thecosmicdispatch@gmail.com, and you can stay up to date with all of the Cosmic Dispatch content on Instagram. If you think you'd be a great guest, or if you have a project you'd like to promote, let us know. Mandee will be there on the other end to collect your info and questions. And you can also sign up for our monthly newsletter, which includes monthly horoscopes, moon reports, bonus content, and information about workshops and consultation schedules. And also, this is new, subscribe to the Cosmic Dispatch YouTube. If you're a visual person or you like to read a transcript while you watch, that's really handy. That's available. And um, YouTube is since we're talking about information, it really helps us with engagement and the show. We've been finding that the analytics that YouTube provides are super helpful. So and I know a lot of you listen to the show, I get your texts, I get your emails, but it's really interesting to see all that anecdotal info plugged into their metrics, their system, because then we can see, what things people are really responding to, what groups of people we're reaching, and that's super helpful. So if you have the time, um, please do that. Follow, like, subscribe. Um, okay, so let's look at the astrology of the week. We have a relatively quiet week, but we are coming off of that T square that I talked about in the last two episodes. Very intense. And we're probably dealing with the fallout of that, or the possible triumph after, that really powerful, power packed configuration. And today, the sun, newly in Gemini, is squaring Saturn in Pisces. So the sun squaring Saturn, here we have the sun squaring the planet Saturn, who really does not like being in the sun's home sign of Leo. So we have a very natural aversion there. So Saturn's instinct is going to be to throw some shade at the sun's radiance. And we also have a Gemini Pisces square where the sun and Saturn are located right now. And so we have Gemini's Pisces tension. Gemini might want to get granular with its questioning and detailed communication. And Saturn and Pisces might prefer to keep things a mystery. This could also look like the dissemination of confusing data or stories. And it could also look like a questioning of the big questions. So this is Pisces, right? This is as broad and as deep as the sea, and it's Saturn, right? We have some gravitas. So these are the big questions like, what does it all mean? And why are we here? And how does my day-to-day life, it'll be like Sun and Gemini stuff, conflict with these more existential reasons for being? So we can kind of get lost in the weeds there. Not a bad thing. It might be time for some existential questioning. And this is also a time when we could see things like mental fatigue, brain fog, where we might need to take a break from questions and the news or socializing. And we may just need to rest and practice some meditation. I see that as another good way to deal with this Sun Saturn situation. Any thoughts, Mandy, on that one?
Yeah, I that sums it up really well. I can say to me, it's kind of felt like this moment, like I've been playing a game of chess and I'm at this like check moment, right? Like the game's not over, but there's this moment of, okay, what's the next move? And kind of making sure it's a little bit more calculated than maybe kind of shooting from the hip, like I would maybe want to. It's kind of interesting. I mentioned earlier, I'm a homeschooling parent. I was sitting down with my kiddo earlier today, and he thought he had all of his schoolwork done, and it turns out he had a little bit more to go than he thought. And there was kind of this moment of, oh my gosh, I thought I was further ahead than I really am. And so he was a little bit disappointed, but he turned that disappointment into motivation to kind of get it done so that he could really be done with it. And I think that that's kind of the broad stroke of this. There's some sort of challenge that needs to be kind of taken on before we can really progress into the next thing.
Yeah, yeah, the sun's like in Gemini, it's ready to play, right?
Yeah,
It's
right.
ready to interact. And then
Yes.
Saturn's like, not so fast.
Not, hold on. Is your homework done? You got a report due tomorrow, dude. Are you good?
And then
Yeah.
on June 1st, Jupiter conjuncts the North Node in Taurus. And so the North Node just kind of intensifies, increases all the things that Jupiter wants to do. Now, Mandy, you have your natal Jupiter in Taurus. Um, and last week too, Jillian had her natal Jupiter in Taurus. So give us a little picture of your experience of Jupiter in Taurus.
I'm so happy you asked me this question, Corey, because it's been really fun to think about, and it's really kind of helped bring some clarity just even in my own mind about my chart and things. I think this really speaks to my natural inclination towards like natural cycles of things. The seasons make sense to me. Looking to natural processes to kind of inform my ideology about how I kind of live my life. I feel like nature and just natural biological processes are how I experience what I think of as God. That may not be everybody's definition of God, but like the idea of two cells coming together to form a human being is pretty cool to me. And that seems big and powerful and godly, but it's also a very natural, earthly process that takes place.
Yeah, it's it's Jupiter, so we're talking about like wisdom, like big wisdom,
Yeah,
and it would be like the wisdom of nature, the wisdom of the body. Um, very not Gemini things. This is not calculated and mechanical. It's it's a wisdom that is so big and it's I'm going to use the word again, even though it's like redundant, but it's natural. Like your body and nature, they do so many things we can't like comprehend just all by themselves. If we just
yeah,
leave it alone, it it makes stuff. And we can study it and we know certain things about, oh, it seems like yeah, the cells, they do this, but I think that's really the tip of the iceberg of like how things come to be and because there's so many factors. But I like that. So Jupiter, when it conjuncts the North Node, it's gonna be amping up all of that stuff. And like you said, you brought in the word God, God and nature. It would be a great time. Now we're starting to get some really hot weather actually. But to go outside, I could see this being a time where you might be a little closer to touching awe or like, profound profound bliss being in your body and in the natural world. So I think that's really something to enjoy, or you might actually crave it. Um, and then on June 2nd, Venus in Cancer trines Neptune in Pisces. And this is really sweet. And it also turns up the volume on the Pisces vibe this week. This weekend coming up looks lovely for doing I'm getting this image of like just doing something on the water. Like I see like a group of people like getting on a boat and just like sailing down somewhere, enjoying each other's company. Maybe it's a family or a group of friends. It just looks next weekend looks really lovely with this aspect. Um it's very serene and tranquil. Could also be very emotional, but not in an intense way, in a tender-hearted way. It's creative as well. It's a good day for music and love letters and relaxing. So if you need a break on this upcoming Friday or Saturday, take it because it could be especially restorative if a little fantasy infused, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with a little like dreamy time. Um, yeah, as we head into summer, that's kind of hopefully what some of summer is about. Um, and so yeah, like it's kind of there's a lull this week in the action. And I don't any thoughts about this week coming up, Mandy? Did I miss something?
no, I think you got it all. I'm looking forward to that Venus trine. I think the Venus Neptune, I think that's going to be a sweet moment after some of these more tense not to, yeah, but the harder.
Yeah,
Yeah, a little soft, serene, kind of. I liked that vision, just kind of bobbing on a boat,
that's what, yeah,
chatter.
like I'm thinking like rafts or little pool floaties or like tubing,
Yeah.
kayaking, even a booze cruise. Like that could totally be
Oh, yeah, Neptune, Pisces,
yeah.
yes.
But yeah, but as with all things, Piscean, especially with boats in water, just be careful with the
Yeah,
alcohol
yeah.
or any of the substances when we have a lot of Pisces. Um, all right. I think it's time, Mandee. I know you have some really good questions
I'm
today.
so excited about these questions. Okay, first question. This is a question that I've also had. I'm really excited to hear from you, Cory. The question is, what are your thoughts on personality tests? How and where does astrology fit into those?
Oh, first of all, I love personality tests. When I was younger, I used to love taking all those quizzes. Um, and I don't think I'm alone on this. Whenever I take them, though, I always want to question the questions. It's like they ask me a question. I'm like, well, but in what situation and how? Because sometimes this and sometimes that. I feel like the questions are never specific enough. And I always wish I could like fill in. It depends. It depends on this and this. And so personality tests, I feel, don't take into account time and context. And I don't think astrology is really about personality. Um, Astrology is about modes of development and growth and decay and transformation. I think, it became about, especially sun sign astrology, pop astrology, it became about personality because of the way that we want to work with it, which is tell me something, give me an answer, right? Um, and astrology does answer some things. It answers where, when, how, maybe even why, but it doesn't answer what. Like, it doesn't answer what is this thing that I'm looking at. The what, I guess, is better answered by something like the personality test because the questions in personality tests are that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to determine like what you are or what something is. And I know a lot of people think that's what astrology is trying to do. And I have that conversation a lot. They're like, oh, astrology is cute, but I don't like to engage with things that are reductive and tell me, who I'm supposed to be. And I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't do that. So, um, but they have some things in common. They're both based on observation. But astrology's delineations and archetypes and stories, they come from centuries upon centuries of observations. So when we talk about, let's say, like a core delineation of Scorpio is oh, they're suspicious, for example. Um, we know that that particular quality has been observed and that story has survived for centuries that as people did this observing, I'm sure a lot of things got left behind that weren't quite cutting it, but there are some core delineations that have stood the test of like so many years. And the fact that they have survived gives them weight. So when we describe some core stories about Scorpio, which is how we hook people into astrology, they resonate. It's like that is so specific, or I feel that I like there's a connection there. Um, but it is not astrology's aim to tell you what you are. It is astrology's aim to describe the lenses and tools you can use to navigate your way through time. Um, well, that's how I use it anyway. Um, was that, did I answer the question? Yeah,
I think
I
so.
think
Yeah.
that's my thoughts on astrology and personality tests. But that's a super interesting question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next, should we
Next,
go ahead? Yeah. Next question.
next question.
Okay. I have always struggled to get the same answers on personality tests. Would something like astrology maybe be more helpful? I feel so out of the loop not knowing my Myers-Briggs or Enneagram type.
Oh, Myers. Have you taken the Myers-Briggs?
Cory, I am too mutable to get the answer. Like, every time I take, I'm like you just said, I never get the same answer. And anytime I get an answer, I'm like, okay, yeah, but so no, I don't know mine.
Yeah, mine flips a little back and forth between it's I'm either an INTJ or an INFJ, depending on the day, but there's some consistency. Um, but the and also, if I'm recalling this correctly, the Myers-Briggs, I forgot my Enneagram, but that's a fun one too. But the Myers-Briggs test, you have to answer like I do this like never or always, some of the time or most of the time. And that actually makes that's just that's too hard. And it yeah,
Yeah,
and it changes on the day. And as we know,
yeah,
our our memory of what we do and when, that's fallible.
yeah,
Memory isn't a real thing. Like it's not a recall process. We make up memories in the present time. So that it's not really reliable. Anyway, I think they're good for reflection, but sort of like the other question, they don't pull you into the larger context of human experience,
yeah,
nature, and collective history. And this is why a lot of spiritual practices use astrology, because it demonstrates how one thing is always a part of something larger. And a lot of people practice this in many different ways. The personality tests, I feel, situate the individual as if it's not a part of history or the environment or the collective. It's just like it's so insular. And also, yeah, our view of ourselves is imperfect. So even if um, I'm answering all the questions and then I get reflected back this like almost diagnosis that feels like, oh, yeah, that's me. It's almost like just me mirroring back my
yeah,
imperfect sense
yeah,
of myself back to myself. So I'm not really sure what the value is except asking the question. Like me thinking about the question, which is always so much bigger than what I can check off in the little box.
yeah, totally.
Let me say, like, I'm trying to find the question in there. Would something like astrology be more helpful? Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you're if you're doing some like self
personal development,
personal development,
reflection.
reflection, study,
Yeah,
astrology I think is more helpful. Um we got to take a short break, and when we come back, a little bit more with questions. So, yeah, let's continue with this like Gemini Sagittarius vibe here.
Yeah, I've got another question. This question is, what is the point? It's a two-part question, which is very on trend, or on theme. What is the point of philosophy? And is it possible to over philosophize or intellectualize the human experience?
Oh, geez. Um, well, I'm not a professional philosopher, even though I love philosophy.
Yeah,
Eastern, Western, yeah, I'm I'm a junkie. I think you're in that same vein, right,
I've
Mandee?
got a ninth house sun
Yeah,
conjunct Jupiter.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, even like my taste in fiction and poetry
Yeah.
lean towards the philosophical.
Yep. Same.
Again, I'm thinking of this Saturn in Pisces square the sun in Gemini. What does it all mean?
Right.
Why is this way and how is this that way? Yeah, but I'm not a philosopher. I did not go to school for philosophy. I just read a lot and have lots of smart friends who I have conversations with. Um, but my personal definition of philosophy would be it's the study of thought. How do we arrive? How is being the operative? How do we arrive at conclusions? How are beliefs and perspectives constructed? And how do those perspectives affect our lived experience? And especially in philosophy, there's more questions than answers. Because if you don't have a good question in philosophy, you can't actually do philosophy because if if there are no questions, you can't observe the thinking process. Like, and I think that's key. You need to be able to see the building blocks of thought and how a theory or a concept is put together. So there's got to be questions for that. Um, and to me, that's the point of philosophy. And when we understand the thought process and how it affects our lives materially, we now have another tool to shift our physical experience. And that we can do that with our mind, like just by changing the way you see something, interpret something, understand something. I'm sure we've all had that experience where um, we had just like a mental epiphany or a little nugget of information that changed the whole way we saw something. And then once you see something differently, you behave differently, you do things differently, and then next thing you know your whole life is different. But it all started with the thought or the string of thoughts concept, and that we can do that with just by using our mind. That's thrilling for me. That's why I like to play around with that all the time. I kind of like to blow my own mind on a regular basis. Like that's what I consider fun, like through books and learning and conversation, to walk away from those things and go, "Oh my God. I just, the world is totally different for me now." Like that's a good time for me. Um, and so now to tie that in with astrology, I think approached in a certain way, you can use astrology like philosophy. Remember, so again, this is a pop astrology thing, but the planets, and I think some traditional astrologers might disagree with me, but per my practice, the planets are not saying things to us. The planets are not talking to us. Mars isn't up there saying, hey, go for it. What the way I practice, what's going on is that people have observed certain qualities about Mars in certain situations. Again, here we go, over centuries. They keep seeing the same thing and thinking about it, asking questions about it. Why does Mars do that when it's, aspected here? Why does Mars do that when it's there at this point in its cycle? Over and over. And they make their interpretations. So, just like philosophy, astrology is the practice of people observing, questioning, and interpreting. And so that's where, like, I say this one all the time. I think of astrology as like the Rosetta Stone of philosophy and thought practice. And so I think in my flavor of astrology, the two are, they work that way. But it's so interesting. This question is, what's the point of philosophy? Um, but that's what it is for me. I'm sure a different, and there are so many different types of philosophies and fascinating philosophers. I mean, there's political philosophy, there's spiritual philosophy, but it's all about, why and how, and how are things formulated, and how does it work that way. Super interesting question. And then the next question, and then I'm sure you might have something to say about this too, Mandee. Can you can is it possible to over philosophize or intellectualize the human experience? Well, yeah.
Yeah, I do it a lot.
Do
It
you
gets a
feel
little
like
existential sometimes.
it's too much, that it actually like takes something away from your life in some way when you do that?
Do I think that or feel that
Yeah.
way? Yeah, I do. It takes me out of reality. It takes me out of what's going on the earth plane when I'm so in my head and wrapped up in different thoughts and what ifs and how does that? And it's fun to go there. I love, like, that's one of my favorite places to be. But yeah, there are definitely times when I'm like, the existential dread is enough to keep you in bed for a day or two.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, if it goes
Yeah,
that way.
yeah,
But sure. So can we over philosophize? And that's a great question also for people who work with astrology. Like you can have your head in the books like all day long. There's
yes.
so much out there. There's so much history. There's so much theory, so much math, like you name it. Um, it's like, but then you have to ask yourself, why are you doing this? Because that's not a crime either. If that's your idea of a good time, right?
Sure.
Playing with all of that, then that's what you're doing for your own like pleasure, even. But I think it becomes too much, in my opinion, when you stop living your life in your body,
Yeah.
because we have one here, and you might be missing some other fun stuff in life. I think some people would call that, navel gazing, or aimless daydreaming. But also on the flip side, I think you can also under intellectualize and under philosophize. Um, and again, my opinion, some people are very just here and now, sensation oriented. What I see in front of me is the world, and that's real, and there's nothing wrong with that. But um if we don't question that, and we don't try to put that in some kind of other context or practice of thought, then we miss out on larger meaning. And so interesting. I had my my ex. Um, a lot of Sagittarius. And and we would have this ongoing argument over astrology for like 5 years, like always. It just never this argument never went away. And it was like, oh, it's because you're always looking for the meaning in things. And I'm like, yeah, what like meaning meaning I think enhances the lived experience for me. Maybe it doesn't for everybody. Um, but if we if we don't if we don't reflect or question, um, then it's also hard to navigate if we are trying to in on the material plane build something or do something. Thought is a great way to plan and play with different ways to thinking of like traveling types of words, but to get somewhere. And I realize I'm gonna get myself in trouble because we don't have to get somewhere to have a meaningful life, but I just think it's a life enhancer. So again, values.
Yeah.
Um, well, our time is starting to run out. Mandee, do you have anything coming up, or are you doing consultations right now?
I am doing consultations. I've got some travel plans coming up for summer, so I'm planning around those. But I do have a little bit of space for one-on-one consultations this summer. And the best way to get that is to email me, and I'll put all of my email and website information in the show notes for
Okay.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because my books are filled with all of your questions, and thank you so much. I'm not seeing people again till August, so I'd highly recommend if Mandee has some space that you reach
Yeah.
out to her
Yeah.
and and get some good questions going. Mandee will be back with us next week for the full moon show, so I encourage you to come back and check that out. And in the meantime, take care, stay cool, and thank you for joining us. And thanks, Mandee.
Thanks, Cory. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.